As you know, there are many approaches of written texts, and here Dr. Bashir is trying to present one of these approaches of written texts. Let's see.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In this video, inshallah, we are going to deal with the third part of the lecture, the part which is related to section C in the book. Today we are going to do the analysis section of lecture 2, Analyzing Texture. That is the title of the section. Different types of texts have specific kinds of texture associated with them and use different kinds of cohesive devices. Okay, so here we have to concentrate on the main words, the key words, in order for us to understand any statement. So as you can see here, we are talking about different types of texts. We know that texts are of different types. We have news articles, for example, we have advertisements, we have letters, we have theses, we have posters. All these are text types, and each text type has a specific kind of texture associated with that text, and we know what texture means now because we have studied this. We covered this in the theoretical part of the lecture. Texture means cohesion, coherence, and intertextuality, so keep this in mind. So any kind of text has its own texture, has its own cohesion, its own coherence, its own intertextuality, which might differ from other types of texts. So that's the idea here. We have some examples, and I just want you to keep these examples in mind because these the idea here will help you analyze different types of texts. For example, descriptive texts, those in which we describe people or things. Any descriptive text, you can in a descriptive text you can describe a building, or you can describe a person, or you can describe anything. So that is called descriptive text. And in this text, it's often the case that the text make heavy use of pronoun reference to avoid repetition. So when you are dealing with a descriptive text, you will find that lots of pronoun references used. Why? In order for the text writer to avoid repetition. So instead of giving the same name, if you are describing a person, for example, you mention his or her name at the beginning, but then you will not mention the name again and again. You want to avoid repeating the name, so you use the pronoun instead of the noun. So in descriptive texts, we use lots of pronoun reference in order for us to avoid repetition. So that is a characteristic or a feature of descriptive texts. In advertising texts, they often use repetition because of the benefit of repeating product names. So for whatever feature we have in any text, we have a reason for that. So in advertising texts, we repeat what? We repeat the name of the product that we are advertising, because that will give the product a value, and also it will promote the product and keeps the product itself in the mind of the reader. So that is why we repeat names of products in advertisement texts. In legal texts, on the other hand, there is a preference to repeat rather than to use pronoun reference. Why? Again, here we have a purpose which is different from what we have in advertisement texts. In advertisement texts, we repeat the product in order for the product to be fixed in the mind of the writer, or rather the one who will buy the product. In legal texts, we also prefer repetition of the names and of the things. We don't use pronoun reference. Why? To avoid ambiguity, because every word in legal texts should be clear. Every word should be precise, and using pronoun reference might confuse the reader, and therefore that thing is avoided in legal texts. They prefer to repeat the names instead of using pronouns. So please keep these features of different texts in mind, because you might be given any kind of text, an advertisement text, or a legal text, or any other kind of text, or descriptive text. So you have to keep these features in mind, so when you analyze that kind of text, you will be aware of its characteristics and features. Another example is for analytical and argumentative texts. They often make heavy use. It means they use a lot. They make heavy use of conjunctions to make logical connections between ideas. Why? Because in argumentative essay, for example, we argue for ideas. Okay, we want to convince the others of the ideas we have. Therefore, we use conjunctions like therefore, moreover, however, and so on, because these will help the writer connect the ideas and make some links between the ideas he or she expresses in the text. Okay, so also, in addition to these differences in the use of cohesion, also different kinds of texts are also based on different kinds of generic framework or predictable sequence, and they trigger different kinds of word knowledge. So we have two keywords here, or two key expressions here: generic framework and word knowledge. And as we have mentioned in the lecture related to the theoretical part, we mentioned that these two things are related to coherence. So we have talked about cohesion and the differences between texts in terms of cohesion. Now we will talk about the differences in terms of coherence. In coherence, as we have mentioned, we rely on the generic framework, the general framework that the text has, because any text will share certain structure with similar texts. So for example, if you are dealing with a news article, the news article has features which are also found in other news articles texts. So that is what we call generic framework. So for example, the news article text will start with a headline, and then maybe we have a main headline, as we will see, and a secondary headline, and then we will have the body divided into small paragraphs, and so on. So that is the structure of this kind of text. That is a generic framework. And any other kind of text will have the same will have a different generic framework. Like for example, letters. We know that letters have a specific kind of structure or generic framework, and theses, for example, have a different structure, and so on. So this generic framework will help you identify the kind of text. So whenever you see a text, you will know from the beginning, you will recognize from the beginning that this is a certain kind of text. But why? Because of the framework it has, or because of the generic framework it has. Another thing is word knowledge, and they trigger different kinds of word knowledge. So when you see a text, that is the meaning of trigger, to motivate different kinds of world knowledge, because when you see a text, you don't see it for the first time. You have experience of seeing this kind of text. If you see a letter, you would say, oh, this is a letter. Why? Because you have some experience. That is the meaning of world knowledge. You have knowledge about that kind of text, about its features, about its framework, because you have seen it in the past, because you have studied it in the past, because you have some experience with that text in the past, and that therefore your world knowledge, the knowledge of the things in the world, will help you identify that text and know what type of text you are dealing with. So this is related to what? Related to coherence. The final thing is intertextuality. We have mentioned something about intertextuality as a component of texture in the text. So as you can see here, texts tend to make connections to different kinds of texts in different ways, such as tags, hashtags, for example, in Facebook, in Telegram, in Snapchat, and so on. You are familiar with the social media and you use hashtags a lot. Quotations and presuppositions. We have mentioned that texts or any text can have links to other texts by, for example, quoting other people's words,